Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of groove, looking at songs that are either groovy or have strong elements of groove in them. I'm pretty interested in this band. I have no idea what I'm getting in for, but they're called Dvne with a V, so I'm already interested right here. The song is called Towers. This is live at Chamber Studios. All right, let's dive in and see what they're bringing for us today. Love seeing that. Just the joy of musicians playing their music, or that electricity of getting started. Very fuzzy, very textural. Yeah! The drums providing some intensity, probably to move us to our next section. A lot of fuzz on that keyboard. Ooh! Ooh, rhythm's a bit tricky there, but I think some... Yes! We've heard a lot of growls, and I think having that distorted clean in there helps break all of it up. Yeah, definitely the grooviest part of the song so far. Yeah. Really interesting to have that quiet piano on top of all of this stuff. Provides an interesting texture against all the grit and fuzz. Using that beat of silence to bring in this part heavy. Yeah, it's these little flourishes of melody that I think they help break up the monotony of the overbearing weight. Yeah. Yeah, those syncopated snare hits against the tremolo picking. Interesting, like semi-triplet element going on in the keyboard on top of all this eighth note playing. Actually, we shifted to 6. We're in 6/8 now. When did that happen? Hmm. Not how I thought that the ending of that was going to go. suppose that works. Uh, all right. So kind of a post-rocky kind of concept, lots of repetition, lots of fuzz, heavy amounts of atmosphere, and just this total overbearing weight on top of everything that solidifies the song. It does stand out to me, at least a little bit, though, that they do utilize this post rock sound for a lot of what they're doing. However, they inject these moments of melody, whether it's within the sound or in opposition to the sound. They do take breaks every once in a while to showcase to showcase the melody, such as the ending there, where we completely got rid of the weight and the fuzz and the distortion of it all. Now, I do want to get this out of the way though, at least for like the first 3 minutes or so of it. I got some heavy Crypto Deer vibes, and that's phenomenal. Crypto Deer was on my album of the year last year, technically as an honorable mention because they released 2 weeks before the the new year, so they technically weren't released in the year, so that's why I couldn't put them on my list. But yeah, really phenomenal stuff here. At least as far as my casual listening and what I've been listening to lately and sort of stuff being up my alley. Like this is I really dig what they're doing here. Um so I think the first thing I do want to talk about though is that concept of atmosphere versus melody. Because the melody really didn't come in strong for several minutes. I thought it was going to be more of a traditional style of post rock where we saw a majority of atmosphere and weight and very little elements of melody at all. However, they did surprise me at least coming in with, well, they had I think we had a keyboard section early on that sort of played a light melody, not something exceptionally melodic, more held out notes, just not held out as long as some of the other instruments were doing to create the atmosphere that they were going for. Instead, um, playing just a little bit quicker, maybe instead of whole notes, doing some half notes and some chord notes here and there. So it had a melodic component to it without actually being a strong melody. I think it was really the first. I think it was that first clean, distorted clean vocal that came in and provided the first real note in the vocals that led us into where we would begin to see a lot of melodic components. Before that, though, I do want to focus in on this opening verse, possibly. Um, well, verses, the first 3 minutes or so. Um, and it is just a complete heavy weight, right? This is just some typical post rock, post metal kind of stuff here. Just kind of laying down all of this weight and effects to provide distortion and destruction to the timbres of these instruments and to basically create that fuzz that feels like it's above everything in the song and is really filling up a lot of space and weighing down on what's being played. Um, we hear it in everything from the guitars to the vocals. We have these really low growls with a ton of compression on top of them. Even the synthesizer, the keyboards at the beginning of this section have this extra fuzz on top of them. The entire song is built, or at least this opening section is built around putting this compression, this crackling on top of every aspect except the drums. And the drums do cut through everything here at the beginning. They are the clearestly heard instrument in this opening 3 minutes. I think it's also interesting that they have two vocalists who both do the same-ish style of harshes. They're slightly different, and I could hear the differences between them, but it was also more of a nuanced idea. It was more about their personal timbre on this specific style of harshes. So yeah, that's, usually we have multiple vocalists who create contrast, male or female, clean versus harsh, screams versus growls. We usually create contrast when we have multiple vocalists. Even something like harmonizing creates contrast in range, even though it might not be as large of a gap between something like screams and growls, we're still having range contrast there. And here, like I said, I just find it very interesting that we have multiple vocalists and they're so similar. That's not something I typically see. And it brings me to ask if there's been any interviews with them or anything like that, how they landed on having two vocalists. Was it just a fact that both of them wanted to do vocals and they just happened to be very similar in style? So instead of choosing one, they said, fine, we'll just alternate verses. Or, how did that come about? It's an interesting choice. It's not something that seems with intent. It's not it doesn't feel like something the band went out and said, "Hey, we want two vocalists who are very similar so they can alternate lines." Um it feels like something that sort of just cropped up in the process of forming the band or in evolving the band. Maybe it started with just one vocalist and the other one started to learn how to growl as well, and decided they wanted to participate in the vocals. I don't know how it came about, but it doesn't seem like something that was intentionally created from the start. That's kind of what I'm getting at there. Um, so yeah, the opening 3 minutes just super heavy, super fuzzy, super distorted, and really bringing this weight down, right? This post metal weight. Somewhere though, we reach a break where we hear a piano. I'm really trying to remember the timing of all this because I'm gonna be honest. A lot of the song felt very samey to me. I do not have a song structure in mind. I do not have landmarks in mind. Most of the ways that I go about forming a timeline of events in the song so that I can speak about them in a specific order or in relationship to each other, none of that stuff was present here. I had a really difficult time parsing what I was listening to chronologically, temporally. But there's a point in here where we had the clean, distorted note, and I think it was just like one syllable or maybe two syllables, but the second one was like super held out. Um, and this was the first big break. This was the first huge change in the song, if I remember correctly. Previous to this, we had that light piano section. Maybe it was right after this. There's a really light, quiet piano that sat above everything else. Because something I forgot to talk about is that not only do we have a lot of weight in the effects, right? We have the compressors, we have the overdrive, we have just the width and raw volume of these electric guitars. We also have a lot of lower range notes. There's just a lot of weight in where these notes are residing, from the bass to the guitar to the keyboard. There's a lot of emphasis put on the lower end of the range, and it provides more of this groundedness, this weight on top of the effects. So it was really interesting when I noticed the keyboard faintly had this melody line above everybody else. And I'm talking about like an octave, octave and a half above everybody else. It's a very distinct sound that cut through everything despite its lack of volume. And as soon as I heard, you know, the sound, and the thing was too, it sounded like a toy piano or a glockenspiel or something. It didn't sound like a full rounded piano tone. It definitely was a bit tinier, and I'm not sure if that is because of the lack of volume, or if that was done intentionally to contrast the width and weight of the guitars, or maybe it was just because comparatively to the guitars, it seemed small, narrow, and tinny. It could have been that it was a typical piano sound, and just compared to the sounds around it, it seemed smaller. But yeah, so this came in with a melody line. We had flow and direction and a variety of notes that were discernible. I mean, I think that's one of the main things is that I don't want anybody to walk away from this and think that I didn't hear the movement of the notes in the guitars. There were riffs. It's not like they were just sitting on a single note, but a lot of the movement is disguised by all of the effects on top of it. A lot of the core timbre is getting removed by the overdrive, by the compression, by all of the extra destruction that they're putting on top to achieve this atmosphere. So I understand there's movement. I watch their fingers move and I can hear a little bit of it, but it really is the notes that are being played are such a small portion of the overall sound. It really is about the feeling and the texture and the atmosphere. That's what has the spotlight, not the notes themselves. So when I'm thinking about it, about those guitar riffs, I know there's movement to them, but that's not what I remember about them because that's not what they spotlit in the production. That's not what they put front and center stage, which I'm kind of conflicted about. But I think that's just because my approach to it is not what they're aiming for. What they're aiming for is atmosphere and texture. That is the point of the song, and it would sound boring if they chose to do a pedal tone and sit on it rather than move about and have these riffs. So they know what they're doing 100%. But on the other side of it, I think it's interesting just because I've never been in this position, and as a composer and musician myself, I don't think I would put myself in this position for the music that I've written to be overshadowed by destructive elements in the audio pipeline. And I don't know if that's an official term. That's what my brain's coming up with. But that is everything that goes between the strumming of the string or however your instrument is played and what comes out of the speaker at the other end. That's all your effects pedals, that's your amplifier, that's your cabinet, that's anything that gets put on an EQ wise in the DAW. There is a lot of elements that go into disguising and masking the notes themselves in this song. And it's just a very odd way to me to go about making a song. If you're going to put the work into the composition, why hide it? And yeah, the answer to the why is because of the feeling, the texture, the atmosphere. You're not going to be able to get this weight or this overbearing element with cleaner tones. It's just not going to happen. But also, the muddier and grittier, dirtier that you make these tones, the more you're going to be covering up the original timbre. There is a balance to it, and I think they found a good balance. Like I said, if I listened into the instruments, I could hear specific notes. This is in drastic contrast to some of the lo-fi black metal we've heard, where the textural element, the destructive effects on top of the notes, really are like 80 to 90% of the sound, and even I have difficulty hearing the movement of notes underneath it. So like I said, I do think they strike a balance. It's a very different way of creating a sound than I'm used to, but I understand why they're going for it. It's still very odd for me, though, to think about it in their perspective. Um, but yeah, oh yeah, yeah. So the melody and the piano, it's sitting above all this stuff, and it really is one of the first times that, at least to my ears, I really hear melodic movement and direction. A lot of the song up until this point has had movement of notes in it. We've had some eighth notes, we've had quarter notes. We've definitely had longer held out notes that provide this atmosphere, this overbearing weight. But there is movement of notes, but a lot of the movement, the notes seem to be moving in a cyclical direction. There isn't much forward momentum or a destination for the music to be pointing towards. It just sort of loops around and around. And that brings us to, like I mentioned, that I have a difficult time finding landmarks in here because a lot of it sounds very samey, and that's what they're going for. right? A lot of this is about that textural weight. We do see some shifts later on in the song, and I even pointed them out as some, very large moments of change in the song. But for the most part in this opening 3 minutes, it is very cyclical. We go through two, I think, ideas, and they're very similar to each other. There's some musical elements underneath the sound that changes the weight and the distortion. But as I mentioned, the weight and distortion is the spotlit element. It's what has center stage. So if that's not changing, it's going to create a similar identity between these sections, even if what notes are being played are changing. So it really is when the atmosphere changes that's going to dictate when the song feels like it's evolved or moved on or become something different. But what I do think is interesting is that at this point we have this distorted clean. We have this piano melody coming in. From here on out, the song is on a roller coaster. We are no longer going in circles. We are moving through several what seems to be linear elements until we reach the end of the ride. It's an interesting change of pace that I was not expecting. Up until this point, I had kind of forgotten that it was a 9 something minute song because the opening segment, like I said, kind of reminded me of a Cryptodira track, and the back and forth I kind of put into like a verse chorus idea as far as the vocalist trading off, and they didn't really change their sound. So we were coming up on the 3 minute mark or so, and I thought I kind of had a handle of what the song was doing and that it was going to be finishing soon because it kind of felt like more of a standard structure song. And yeah, I got thrown for a bit of a loop there when we started moving into the last 60% of the song, and they decided to go in a variety of different ways and explore this overall vibe of heaviness and weight with a little bit of beauty on top of it in several different ways. Now, one of the different ways was groove. And working this into this week's theme, I don't personally find the song to be super groovy. It had that one groovy section in it where I started bobbing my head and moving along with it. It just had this really interesting syncopated element to it that made me want to move my body. But for the most part, a lot of the rest of the song is about this heaviness, this weight, this rigidity that to me is the opposite of groove. I'm really interested to know if people find this groovy, right? Is this something that you feel like you can get into a rhythmic vibe with? Hmm. The other day I mentioned that I had a difficult time defining groove because it means a lot of different things to different people, and I had mentioned that it was at least to me, a rhythmic component that usually utilizes syncopation to imply a rhythmic element that makes the listener want to move their body. Like that's kind of how I worked it. But I think a rhythmic vibe might be a really great way to condense that because it also includes the subjectivity of groove. If you're not vibing with it, it doesn't have groove. If you are vibing with it, it has groove, but it also means that it has groove to you. You're the one vibing with what's going on. Huh. I might have to work that into my vocabulary. I like that. But yeah, so we had that like super groovy section that really worked, and we had a couple of guitar solo sections that focused in on melodic structure and completely changed up the textures, the tones, the feeling, because one of the key elements, again, is this weight, this fuzz, this distortion. It comes primarily from the guitars. And when one of the guitars switches off from that and we have a cleaner, brighter sound to it, that's going in stark opposition of this feeling that we've had. So instead of having two guitars creating this atmosphere, we have one guitar creating an atmosphere that we're used to, and one changing it up. So yeah, that's really interesting. The keyboard began to pick up faster and faster riffs, I guess. I think I'm gonna go with licks. Riffs sound weird when talking about a piano. But yeah, these repeating looped melodic lines that we saw the pianist use a few times in a couple of sections. The bassist was just killing it. The drummer was getting more and more intense throughout the song. We started out with somewhat of a rigid metronome style drum beat, and the drummer quickly opened up with embellishments, fills, even moving out of that first 3 minutes. I mentioned the drummer starting to really open up what's going on. They're not playing so rigidly. They're putting in some nice embellishments. I said they're bringing in the next section, and sure enough, we went into the first huge change. The drummer did a fantastic job of foreshadowing that. And then, like I said, throughout the rest of the song, though, we begin to see more and more interesting ideas coming from the drummer. We get some tom runs, we get some cymbal embellishments, we get some little fills in the middle of passages. Um, you know, Usually the fill is used at the end of a phrase to sort of put a period at the end of a 4-bar idea or an 8-bar idea. And instead, it felt like fills were being used all throughout the song, throughout the sections, without using it as punctuation, but using it as embellishment, of ornamentation, of adding additional elements on top of what already was being played. And I think that's really the two major things I wanted to talk about is the atmosphere they created, how they went about making it, and how they included melodic ideas on top of or around it to create a different vibe, to kind of create their own sound. I've heard a lot of post metal tracks that are kind of just what they did at the beginning. And I like how they explored what post metal could be with strong elements of melody around it, whether that is the guitar solos or whether that's something that the keyboard is adding on top of it. And I liked how the song kind of evolved from something that fit a more standard structure into something a bit more proggier and linear. They really began to explore new ideas within this sound and built ideas off of that. I do wish, though, well, I was going to say, I wish the vocalist that we would get both vocals doing something at the same time. But without that strong contrast between their sounds, I wonder if it would become too muddy. I don't think that they could harmonize. I don't know that that would work too well unless one of the vocalists has a pocket for ice cream or something that they can put some distance in the perceived range on. But I would love to hear counterpoint between them, where they're both doing separate vocal lines. I think that would be pretty nifty. Oh, and then the one vocalist on the right also had a clean vocal. So actually cleans with growls would be a nice combination too, just to put a little bit more emphasis on some lines. But I don't know how often the cleans come in. It was only done for such a small fraction of this song, and I don't have any other context. I don't think I've listened to another Dune track before, so I don't know how prominently they're showcased. I was surprised though with how proficient the clean came out though. It had a really strong, full sound to it. So I don't know what it is. It really shouldn't surprise me. I've listened to a ton of phenomenal singers who have powerful growls or powerful scream, just a powerful harsh, and also really strong, clean singing. It really is not an anomaly, but for whatever reason, I don't know where this comes from, but it's stuck in my thinking that when somebody primarily uses growls, it's because that's all they can do. And for whatever reason, I'm always surprised after hearing an extended amount of growling to hear, a really strong, clean vocal. It shouldn't surprise me. It really shouldn't. I understand it shouldn't, but it does. And I guess, normally we would move into the lyrics at this point, but I have no idea what's going on here. There seems to be some sort of collective group that are trying to push the world forward. There's been decay and destruction. The opening stanza starts out, says, "March forth through ghost cities, the rivers of exiles, deserts, the ashes, life leaves lifeless debris." There's definitely been some sort of mass extinction or destruction of this world that they're talking about. And there seems to be a group of people who are trying to bring it back or to build it up, at least in some sense. Not necessarily any notion of history here, trying to make it how it was, but definitely trying to build it up from where it is. And yep, I don't know. That's about it. There's some opposition possibly. I don't know. This one's going over my head. So I don't really have anything to tie this into the themes of the song, but I can appreciate it on the basis of it being a bit more of an experimental take on the post-metal sound. I I like the atmosphere of post-metal. If I'm in the right mood for it, there really is nothing that really hits as well as this heavy just overbearing weight that post-metal can dwell inside. And what's really kind of pushed me away from the genre, though, is the repetitiveness of it. It usually changes in nuance rather than wide sweeping changes. And this sort of brings more of the structure that I tend to enjoy into this soundscape of post metal. So I really enjoyed this. I would not mind listening to some more Dvne and exploring what they're doing, especially anything that might include more layers. Like I said, let's double up some vocals. Let's include some counterpoint in here. Let's really push the melodic angle of this and see how far we can take it without disrupting that overbearing weight that is so central and core to this style of music. Anyways, those are my thoughts on Dvne's Towers. This is where you guys come in. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you thought of this one, if you enjoyed it or not, anything that stood out to you, or if you have any information about the lyrics. I mean, I'm open for that. This these things went right over my head. When you're done commenting, you can head up to the description box. In there is a link for a Linktree. It'll take you to this menu right here. It has everything related to the channel. You can submit your own special selections, follow me on Twitter, support the channel through Patreon, pick up some merch. There's a bunch of stuff in there. Go ahead and check it out. When you're done with that, above the description box, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for this video, but 8 minutes ago, the special selection came out today. It's a band called Ocean Size. They sound familiar, but I can't place a sound, so I'm excited to get into that. If you're excited too, you can go ahead and check that out. Like I said, the link is already available. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC. We're going to finish up this Groove Week and look at our creator request, which is where a band gets in contact with me and asks me to look at their music. All right, until next time, remember to be critical but not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.